Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film The Giver. I have not read the book that this film is based on, which is a very prestigious book, which I've heard for many, many years is a very good book, but I haven't read it. The Giver kind of reminds me of another movie that was based on a book that I had been told forever that I should read and didn't, but then saw the movie anyway, which was Ender's Game. And I think what both this film and Ender's Game's problems are is they kind of lose the impact that the original novel has. It's almost like they are missing the point. Now, I think Ender's Game was a lot worse about it than The Giver was. I mean, I didn't read either book, so I might be completely off. When I hear about the differences between the two, it seems like they tried to change it to be more Hollywood. I always think that's a really bad idea since, you know, the reason the books were so hailed was because they were so different. When you try to make these novels more similar to already established hits, it doesn't really work as well. You get these kind of awkward adaptations, and The Giver is very much a YA book adaptation genre film. It feels a lot like Divergent, with an opening monologue explaining the world, having a very prestigious actress play the villain, a film that's not too challenging for the viewer. It doesn't have the most respect for the people who read these books, which I think is another reason this film won't really go much beyond that, because the people who would see this would probably be insulted by it, who would be the most excited, and the people who haven't read the book would be like, I don't get it, this was a big deal. A young man named Jonas, who in this future society, when all his friends are being picked for jobs, he is selected to be the receiver of memory and to be trained by the previous receiver of memory, played by Jeff Bridges, who is now the Giver, and he needs to give him knowledge so that the government and the leaders, the head leader played by Meryl Streep, can get advice from him. So he's kind of like an advisor. This new kid, Jonas, is being trained to be that advisor, but he's experiencing feelings and memories and starting to see color, because in this futuristic society they've been giving injections that kind of minimize their feeling and choices and free will and being able to see color. But since he's stopped taking his injections and starts experiencing things and reading books, he starts to see the real world again and starts rejecting this dystopian society. Both this film and Divergent have this thing where the main character is trying to be an outlaw from society. Like in Divergent, she's divergent. And the funny thing is about this and Divergent, they're so kind of controlled and easy to go down. They're like the least divergent movies of the year. They're so carefully made, studio controlled YA film adaptations. The Giver, in the book, all the kids are about 12, but they age them up 5 years and are played by people in their mid-20s, and it's made to appeal more to people who are into the Hunger Games and Divergent and the whole YA crowd that started with Twilight, but to be more socially acceptable, we'll say it was started with the Hunger Games. The Giver doesn't really stray from the YA pact at all. In fact, much like Divergent, it's so into that genre, it doesn't really break free from it. You can kind of tell there's an interesting story in here, and if they had committed more to it and this hadn't been made after kind of Hunger Games and all this stuff, maybe it could have been that, but it didn't get greenlit by any studio before that, so clearly it wasn't going to happen. The things they do with the black and white, people keep acting like the black and white's a big deal. I guess they don't see many black and white movies, and so, you know, a major studio film in black and white is like a big deal, even though next week Sin City's coming out, but whatever. I'm supposed to act like that's something that's interesting, but it's really not, for a variety of reasons. One, that's like black and white, watch more movies maybe, but also the black and white parts are not lit or shot for black and white. You actually have to light scenes differently for black and white in a movie. Like if you're using a professional cinematographer, there are different rules to shooting in black and white than there are for shooting in color. Apparently in the book, it is in black and white. Well, I mean, I guess it isn't because it's a book, but like the idea of it is in black and white. It felt like the black and white parts could have been made better. Certainly the color parts weren't visually amazing anyway, and they didn't seem to really know how to use the color versus black and white that well. I mean, you think of things like Pleasantville or Wizard of Oz, who really emphasized it and used it for something, and this film didn't seem to really get into it as much. I kept thinking how Pleasantville was so much better at making the points that The Giver was making, but didn't have to fall into these genre trappings. It could really be its own movie, which is why why I still kind of think about Pleasantville, and The Giver is kind of just a forgettable YA adaptation. That's kind of sad because I think you could have done more with it, and there's certain parts where you can feel like this film could have been something more. I mean, you have Meryl Streep, who is actually pretty good as a villain. I don't really see her do many like kind of big, expensive sci-fi movies, and especially as a villain. She's definitely one of the best parts of the movie, and Jeff Bridges is perfectly cast as the Giver. He's wanted to make this film for a while. He wanted his father to play the role. That shows how long he's been attached to the project, and he's actually a producer on the film. I wish he had gotten to make the original version instead of this version. The kid who plays the main part, Jonas, who has actually had a really busy year. I didn't realize I'd seen so many movies with him in them until I looked him up. The actor Brendan Twatties has actually been in Oculus, The Signal, and Maleficent, and now this. So I've seen like 4 movies with this guy, and I like did not know that. The whole time I kept thinking about how he's too model-like, and that's fine if you're a good enough actor. He's all right, he's not horrible, but he was majorly miscast. I needed someone who really looked like he could be hanging out with the Giver. I don't have a problem with having a good-looking guy or good-looking people in movies. That's been going on forever, but I think they should have picked someone who's maybe better for the part. When you have people perfectly cast for the adults, usually, like Katie Holmes playing a motionless robot of a person, that works perfectly for her. The kids didn't feel like they were as well cast. It's just they were like, these are good-looking people who demographics say people will like. It felt like Twilight was better casted than this movie in terms of the young people, and that should be important to you. It's almost like this got half the equation of how they cast Harry Potter. It's like when they cast Harry Potter, they ended up with some really great young actors and then some really more experienced older English actors, and you get like this really great cast. And this felt like they got only the older actor part and forgot the younger actor part, and so it doesn't really work as well. There's a couple things in this film they kind of emphasize a lot and then change a little bit. The black and white and the color thing, sometimes it stays on perspective and sometimes it doesn't. There were times when he'd have like the Meryl Streep character and Katie Holmes character talking and it would be in color, but then suddenly when Jonas left the city, suddenly they didn't have color, but it's not like they would have anyway. It kind of like didn't even respect its own logic. The director, Philip Noyce, who's more known for doing things like Patriot Games and Clear and Present Danger and Salt, and probably should have directed that Jack Ryan movie instead of something like this. He's a really odd choice, and it kind of reminds me of Martin Campbell being picked for Green Lantern. He's certainly a really good, well-experienced studio action director. He didn't completely fall apart, and this is not a really well-directed film, but it's not a complete disaster either, and it visually works a lot better than your average modern director really could. But I kind of would much rather have him do more of a genre big budget action film than something like this. I don't really understand why he was picked for this. It probably would have been a lot better if they had picked more of a science fiction director, but instead they picked a studio action director, and it kind of just reflects the studio trying to get someone who they think could reliably make a movie, but not someone who's really going to do anything interesting with the material. And so that's kind of what you get from The Giver. It's such a genre YA adaptation, it can't really aspire to be anything more, and it doesn't even try to be anything more. It just looked like a very studio mangled motion picture and probably should have been given a lot more respect. If you're going to tackle a story and you're going to adapt it and you're going to get people excited for the movie, why don't you give them the reason that they wanted to see it made into a movie in the first place, instead of changing it to make it more commercial. You're kind of actually taking away its actual commercial aspects, which is like the reverse point of what you're actually trying to do, so you just kind of messed up everything. So if you have seen The Giver and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.